Sciences and the College of Human Ecology enthusiastically joined a set of others to offer support and co-sponsorship for this event. So I want to thank them. The director of the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research also joined, the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment, the Department of Global Development, the Cornell Botanic Gardens. Am I missing somebody? And oh yes, and Cornell Cooperative Extension. So thank you all for making it possible. Oh, and also Marvin Pritz, who has brought some of his class here to join us today, also joined us as a co-sponsor. So thank you very much for making this event possible. I also want, it wouldn't be actually happening if it wasn't for Celeste Carmichael also. So I want to give a special thank you to Celeste, who with her colleagues in Extension have enthusiastically picked up this new book and are using it to open people's imaginations and bring some new ideas and energy to the work they're doing. So I came to Cornell in August of 1999. Sometime in the fall of the year 2000, I was living by myself in a house that overlooked Cayuga Lake. And as I was sitting there, the opening two lines of one of my favorite poems was in my head. The poem's called The Song of the Wandering Angus by the great poet Yeats. And Angus is in the Irish mythology associated with youth, love, summer, and poetic inspiration. Those first two lines are, I went out to the hazelwood because a fire was in my head. And those lines were in my head because there was a fire in my head. Because I was here at Cornell University as a new faculty member with great romantic hopes of being in a place that Liberty Hyde Bailey used to be in, who is somebody in my research I had discovered and fallen in love with, frankly. But the world as it is was giving me a fire. And so what I found myself doing is I woke up in the middle of the night and I took a little black notebook and I decided I'm going to pull one by one Liberty Hyde Bailey's books off of my shelf where I had a whole collection of them. And I am going to by hand with a pen write passages from those books because the fire in my head can only be disciplined and turned productive by the spirit of this person. And so I began with a nature study idea. And just two of the lines to give you a sense of this, which John is going to share more of. The happiest life has the greatest number of contacts with the world, and it has the deepest sympathy with everything that is. That one sentence, I can hold that sentence, I still hold that sentence as a way of dealing with the reality of the world that we're living in, but also inviting me, opening me into the wonderfulness that we can experience when we have sympathy, when we have context. At that exact same time, I was spending time with a friend whose name is Paul Morgan. Paul, if you're watching, we should raise a toast because we were thinking at that time, wouldn't it be wonderful to republish Liberty Hyde Bailey's books? Let's do a Liberty Hyde Bailey reader and let's try to make that happen. Well, I'm so happy that 24 years later, we are here today with a person who has made this dream possible. So John Lindstrom was born and raised in South Haven, Michigan, which happens to be the hometown of Liberty Hyde Bailey. I'm just going to say a few brief things here. He did a BA in English at Valparaiso University. And I have to share this as a way of lightening up because you put it on your CV. Here's the title for John's honors thesis. Thoreauvian relinquishment and Whitman-esque superfluidity towards an eco-critical reconciliation. So that gives you a hint of what's in this man's head, or what was in this man's head. So after that was in 2010, then John did a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and Environment at Iowa State University in 2013. Then he took I think it was after that you became the executive director of the Liberty Hyde Bailey Museum, or sort of overlapping with that period. So there is a museum at South Haven, the Bailey Homestead, and John was the executive director for 2 years. And then John went to New York City to do a PhD at NYU in English and American literature. I had the pleasure and honor of being on his dissertation committee, a really fabulous piece of work that involved Liberty Hyde Bailey as one of the components of that work. John is, one of the things I like that's on his CV is that he was the inaugural Bailey-Wick Writer in Residence at the Ag Arts Farm to Artist Residency Program at Bailey-Wick, which is Bailey's summer house up on the lake, which is now owned by the Girl Scouts, the Comstock Girl Scouts. And I remember visiting you when you were doing that. Currently, John is the Mellon Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow in Climate and Inequality at the Climate Museum in New York City. And starting this fall, John is going to be an assistant professor of English at Centenary College in Shreveport, Louisiana. So congratulations for finding a faculty position in English in the 21st century, not an easy thing. John's CV is already full of just dozens and dozens of published poems, of published nonfiction work. You'll be able to see out in the lobby afterwards that his new book of poetry has just been published called To Leave Our Own Country. I believe there are copies that are going to be out here. John has also edited the republication of a centennial edition of Liberty Hyde Bailey's probably most important book called The Holy Earth, originally published in 1915, and this was 2015. He also, with John Stempian, edited the Liberty Hyde Bailey Gardener's Companion, also published by Cornell University Press. And most importantly, he is the series editor for the Liberty Hyde Bailey Library. The dream that we had 24 years ago of existing, John made it possible and is leading it. Forthcoming books include Outlook to Nature, which is the next book in the queue, one of Liberty Hyde Bailey's books that he's working on to be republished. And he and I are collaborating together on a book that we're calling A New Hold, which is a Liberty Hyde Bailey quote that will bring a collection of people together to write essays in the spirit of Bailey's philosophy in relation to the climate change moment and world that we're living in today. So John is a fabulously talented writer and scholar, and I'm so happy that he's here with us today. So, John.
Thanks so much, Scott. All right, so thank you all for coming as well. Scott already did a great job. Thanking everyone for supporting this program. It's so great to be here again. Ithaca increasingly starts to feel like a kind of home away from home after I don't know how many research trips here. The first one, a couple professors of mine at Iowa State just got together like a few $100s of their research funds and said, you need to go there. And I think it was two layover all day affair to get from Ames, Iowa to Ithaca, New York. Anyway, so what I've tried to do, I've just put together a few slides. We're going to go through a little bit of the historical context, a little bit about Liberty Hyde Bailey, and also the content of this book itself, just getting a few of the ideas out. And then we're going to have a panel to discuss that in a little bit more depth and talk about applying these ideas to our current moment, like why revisit this book today? So Scott already mentioned, this is the first volume of the Liberty Hyde Bailey Library. The Gardener's Companion, The Holy Earth preceded the series, but are also in print and available. And I just wanted to put a slide up here with a picture of my daughter, Chloe, who is 2 years old. She just turned 2 in March. Partly to remind myself that at the core of this book, sort of somewhat uniquely among Bailey's books, is a real focus on the child and what it means to be a child and what our children need from us and what our responsibilities are to them. And I tend to think about Bailey's work in the context of environmentalism, conservation, and what we can learn in our current moment of climate change. So I have a tendency to get kind of high level with it, but this is helping ground me in the fact that what we're talking here about is really a pretty universal truth about children, which is access to firsthand experiential encounters with the natural world is just good for little humans and for older humans too. This is our little green corner of the world in Queens, behind our duplex, where we currently live. So I hesitated even putting a slide up here, trying to put half a slide's worth of bullet points about Bailey's life and accomplishments. Everyone here who knows anything about Bailey probably can think of a major thing that should be listed that's not, but for the sake of a little bit of a timeline in common, born in South Haven, as we heard, on a farm, went to Michigan Agricultural College, which was one of the earlier land grant colleges, and then studied under Asa Gray at Harvard, went back to Michigan Ag to Asa Gray's reported dismay because he was going to do horticulture, and botanists don't study horticultural plants. But Bailey's remembered as sort of the father of modern horticulture for bridging the art of horticulture and the science of botany and insisting that this was a false binary. And from there, after just 2 or 3 years, came to Cornell, where he spent most of his professional career and retirement in Ithaca. He led this nature study initiative while, I believe, director of the Cornell Experiment Station. It was for that initiative he hired Anna Bosford Comstock, the first woman professor at Cornell, although denied a full set salary by the Board of Regents until much later. Hopefully we'll talk about Anna Comstock a bit. Founding Dean of the College of Agriculture here. And at the same year that the Nature Study idea was published, in fact, he chaired Theodore Roosevelt's Commission on Country Life, penned its report, which arguably led to a lot of rural reform in the country. Retired kind of early and somewhat tumultuously in 1913, published The Holy Earth, 1915, devoted a lot of his retirement not only to botanical collecting, but also to writing and publishing the books that he wanted to write and publish, which included a lot of philosophical books, his first book of poetry. So anyway, that gives you, I don't know, a very, very rough idea. And then I love this quote from the nature study idea because it helps tie the nature study movement to these other things he's working on, right? The evolution of the land grant idea of extension, agrarian reform, the country life movement. So here he's writing about the nature study movement, but he's bringing all this together. The time is coming quickly when the college or school that wants really to reach the people must teach rural subjects from the human point of view. The real solution of the agricultural problem, which is at the same time the national problem, is to give the countryman a vital, intellectual, sympathetic, optimistic interest in his daily life. For myself, if I have any gifts, I mean to use them for the spiritualizing of agriculture. It's an interesting statement to read from someone assuming the deanship of a college of agriculture, right? Kind of beautifully spiritual. Sympathy was a very key word for him in the nature study movement. And I think when he says spiritualizing of agriculture, he's not saying agriculture as a field is not already a spiritual discipline, but that there are ways in which we can be more aware to our relationships to the world that we're living in. And the College of Agriculture can do that for people. So I'm not going to get into a lot of weeds with some of these slides. Julia Field is the person, a childhood teacher who made a big impression on Bailey in South Haven. And I tried to do some research on her for this book because her history has been sort of buried, but taught Bailey's first natural history course. This was a frontier town, and a settler in the town had a copy of the natural history book that was missing its cover and its title page, so he never knew the title of the book. But he brought it in and said, I'd like to take a class in this. Can I do this? And Julia Field in this little 2-room school said, sure, I don't know anything about natural history, but let's read through it together. But she didn't stop there. And the story that Bailey would tell is one day he came to school. Bailey told this in multiple different interviews throughout his life. Came to school and Mrs. Field was sitting there and said, Bailey, or Liberty, I feel sorry for you. And he said, well, why would anyone feel sorry for me? Well, you're living in a wonderland and you're walking through it with your eyes shut. Bailey protested. And she said, well, okay, if your eyes are open, tell me how many maple trees you walk by on your way to school. You walk a mile through the woods every day to get to school. How many maple trees are there? And so he didn't know, but the next day he did, and he reported that number. And she said, okay, sure. So how high are the tops of those trees from the ground? And he didn't know that either. But it was one observation after the other. And he dedicates the book to Mrs. Julia Field King, a teacher who allowed a boy to grow, because he said what she showed him was he had been walking through the world in a way with his eyes shut. Maybe he was in his own head, maybe he, was focusing on different things, but he learned to start really paying deep attention to the natural world around him. And that changed his life, and presumably led him partially down the path that he followed. And he wanted other kids to have this opportunity. So eventually, 1897, when the Nature Study Bureau gets started here at Cornell, or a little bit after that, he writes this pamphlet called What is Nature Study? And this is the result of him going around the state with Anna Botsford Comstock by horse and buggy. Karen Penders St. Clair tells the story really well in her research. And meeting with teachers and learning from and with teachers about what was working. It was this new educational movement. New ideas like the field trip were being coined at the time. So if you've ever gone on a field trip, thank a nature study teacher. So he publishes this pamphlet, which is really a distillation of what he has learned from other teachers in New York State. And he says, it is the seeing of things which one looks at and the drawing of proper conclusions from what one sees. Nature study is not the study of a science, as of botany, entomology, geology, and the like. That is, it takes the things at hand and endeavors to understand them without reference to the systematic order or relationship of the objects. It is therefore supremely natural. It simply trains the eye and the mind to see and to comprehend the common things of life, and the result is not directly the acquirement of science, but the establishment of a living sympathy with everything that is. The goal of nature study is this sympathy. And he was concerned about this because the reason that Cornell got funding for the Nature Study Bureau was there was a commission set up by the state of New York to investigate the abandoned farm problem. This was in 1893. There's an economic panic, and a lot of farmers are no longer able to afford to live on the land, and they're moving to cities, and the state is concerned about this. And who is on that committee but Anna Botsford Comstock? And she's the author of the Handbook of Nature Study and a big figure in this movement. And she convinces them, I think, to appoint an amount of money specifically for nature study. So nature study was going to help with the abandoned farm problem. How does that work? Well, part of the idea was that by developing this sympathy, this spiritual sense of belonging on the land, Bailey has a great quote where he says, when I thought about what was going to entice children to continue to live on the land and find a fulfilling, meaningful life, it wasn't going to be how to get another bushel of wheat per acre. it was probably going to be something about learning to love the dandelions, having a nice flower garden. And so the nature study movement was about that kind of sympathy with the world in which you live, wherever that happens to be. So this is, I just love this picture of the Nature Studies Summer School at Cornell in 1898, partly so you can see, this is Bailey with his hat in his hand, and just behind him and to the right is Anna Botsford Comstock. Just to his right is John Henry Comstock, the entomologist who was Anna's husband. This is Isaac P. Roberts, who was the first head of this program and then kind of quickly handed it over to Bailey. But also just the number of women in this picture, this was a woman-led movement. And the fact that Bailey insists in his book that this is a movement coming out of the schools, he's talking about women who were working in small rural schools where men didn't work because the pay was bad and you didn't last very long oftentimes. But he really put faith in these women as the leaders, and Comstock would describe his administration as years of sympathetic and understanding administration. So it's crossing gender lines. It also crosses racial lines. We can talk about the program that was set up between Cornell and Tuskegee and Hampton Institute in the South during the Q&A or something. But the book really takes off, ironically, through an argument with Bailey's college professor, William James Beale. In this photo, you see Beale sitting next to an undergraduate Bailey at Michigan Agricultural College. Beale was Bailey's hero in a lot of ways and mentor, but he became part of this group of scientists, university scientists, most of them men, who started to become very suspicious of this nature study movement that was led mostly by women. And in an essay that he publishes titled, "What is Nature Study?" in the journal Science, he attacks the movement as sentimental. And so Bailey's idea of sympathy quickly morphs into sentimental in these critiques, right? That's a very gendered term. And so he publishes the second one a few months later, where he quotes this group of eminent scientific men who are all worried about this irrational, there's too much poetry, it's not scientific enough. And it's just 4 months after that that the nature study idea is published. Bailey didn't write the book in that time. He wrote it in 1901. But I'm not going to read this, but this is how the sentimentalism, gushing sentimentalism or mere rambling talks, that's what Beale is worried about. And then this is how Bailey starts the nature study idea. A contributor, won't be named, to a recent issue of a leading technical journal, never mind, it's the journal Science, has endeavored to find a satisfactory answer to the question, what is nature study, by appealing to eminent scientific men. The answers of these men are printed there in full. Now, the nature study movement is not a product of eminent scientific men, nor directly of the current natural science movement. It is a product of the common schools, which is a term meaning public schools at the time. It is a pedagogical term, not a scientific term. And a little later on in that chapter, nature study then is not science, it is not knowledge, it is not facts, it is spirit, it is an attitude of mind. It concerns itself with a child's outlook on the world. It's beautiful. So I'm just gonna kind of try to wrap up some of these different threads before we launch into this conversation that we're gonna have. At the top here, you see, again, a passage from that quote I shared at the beginning. If the real solution of the agricultural problem is to give the countryman a vital, intellectual, sympathetic, optimistic interest in his daily life. So everyone was asking this question, why do the boys leave the farm at this time? Bailey had some fun with that question in some of his other books. But there was this large migration happening from rural to urban. Think of the progressive era, think of urban slums, all the reforms that were happening at the time. So there was also a growing awareness of soil degradation and ecological destruction, and the field of ecology was starting to blossom. And Bailey was linking this to the lack of what he called a permanent agriculture, which is a term he coined in the 1890s that would become quite influential in the 20th century. But he saw this as a social as much as a scientific problem. A permanent agriculture is a social reality, and it exists in communities. And ultimately, this comes down to his theory of democracy, really. But the answer to this social fabric that was tearing apart had to do with a worldview transition, a new hold, as he would call it, on this outlook to nature that would actually bridge the rural-urban divide, which was a concern he had in 1905. That's obviously very active today. So these are two final quotes to give a sense of this kind of ecological relationality that he thought was something that we would derive, that children would begin to pick up naturally from this kind of student-centered experiential learning in the outdoors. Man is a land animal, and his connection with the earth, the soil, the plants, animals, and atmosphere is intimate and fundamental. This earth relationship is best expressed in agriculture, not agriculture merely as a livelihood, but as the expression of the essential relationship of man to his planet home. The best agriculture is a perfect adaptation of man to his natural environment. There is no effective living in the open country unless the mind is sensitive to the objects and phenomena of the open country, and no thoroughly good farming is possible without this same knowledge and outlook. Good farmers are good naturalists. So this is why Cornell University became a leader in the nature study movement during the Progressive era, which quickly became an international movement. Actually, the Junior Naturalist Clubs at Cornell that John Spencer ran had members in Egypt and a couple other countries around the world. Even though it was supposed to be mostly New York State, they just couldn't contain it. And I'm not going to read this, I don't think, but I encourage you to read the foreword of the book by David Orr, where he really makes the case that, I love, Bailey cannot be rightly dismissed as a quaint anachronism, a throwback to some long gone era. I think it's more accurate to describe Bailey as a throw forward. So I'm just going to leave you with that, and let's have a conversation. Thank you all.
So I encourage our panelists to come up. And if you can leave this chair open for you. So I'm so delighted that we're joined by two people that will help us think through what John has just said and how this book is connecting to work that is being done today that you are helping to lead. So first we have Krista Nunez, who is the founder and director of CAN Cooperative Media, the Learning Farm, and its nonprofit sister organization, Cuba International. She operates the STEAM in Nature program at the Learning Farm, spearheads the literacy initiative, Ubuntu Library, that centers narratives of people of color, and directs Quarter Acres for the People, a food justice-focused program for youth and family farming, education, and land governance. And if that isn't impressive enough, she's also a PhD student with us here at Cornell, I'm so happy to say. And through her PhD studies in global development at Cornell, and in and for her nonprofit organizations, as well as with community organizations, such as her church and Black Farmers United, Krista works to diversify farming and scholarly landscapes and prioritizes the increase of equity in land holdings. In order to create sustainable food, land, and nature systems for systemically urbanized and displaced youth and families, this work includes the uplifting of stories that center people of color in dignity-affirming ways. So thank you for joining us. I'm excited to hear what you're going to say. Alexa Malley is also joining us. And Alexa is the interim New York State 4-H Youth Development Program Leader at Cornell University's Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research. Alexa aims to help youth and adults grow curiosity and thrive through experiences that weave together learning, positive youth development, and leadership. In Alexa's first extension job putting knowledge to work when she was about 11 years old, her grandfather had her pulling out source material to prove her points, though he agreed with her all along, it says in parentheses. Later on, her work became advocating for her peers in high school, ensuring a teacher was grading fairly. So both of these are women to be contended with here, we can see. Her first paid CCA Cornell Cooperative Extension foray right out of college was being thrown into a county fair and a calendar full of events, not really knowing what the expertise she was to develop was, and gradually coming to understand that the power and promise of 4-H is positive youth development. Today, the purpose of Alexa's work is to help people notice their sparks and strengths, to notice how they can contribute to the world through those sparks, and to grow relationships and work together to create environments where everyone thrives. So thank you to both of you, and
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Do I need this? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me? There we go. All right. I'm Krista. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Scott, and thank you for that really beautiful introduction to Bailey. I came to Bailey late in the game, but reading him and reading your book and bringing his work to the fore and has been meaningful to me, and I've been really enjoying digging into it. I started the Learning Farm with my husband and children 7 years ago here in Ithaca. We had started it back in California, but really started at a farm here in Ithaca in earnest 7 years ago. And Pete and I started that farm by going back to where we came from, really going back to me as a 3 and 4 year old in Michigan. I'm also from Michigan, and I was from East Lansing, Michigan, where Bailey went to MSU. And when I was growing up, there was this beautiful swamp, and it was my personal wetland, and we lived in a duplex. And I would go, and what is now, it's right now a strip mall that really nobody goes to, but at the time it was my swamp, and I would go in and let the praying mantises crawl on me, and I would pick up my frogs, and I had a collection of cattails and all sorts of plants, and it was my quiet space. When things would be kind of crazy in my duplex, we would go over and just immerse ourselves and be happy in nature. And coming back here and finding a piece of land with my family and seeing my kids with berry smeared faces was just like coming home. And we wanted the farm to be a place where kids could feel like they had a space of their own, that they could engage in the things of their choosing, that they could guide their own processes and learn all the things that they wanted to learn with their own choices in mind. So thanks for having me.
Maybe I should have gone first. Yeah, so thank you. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to explore Liberty Hyde Bailey's ideas more. I've always been a 4-H'er, part of cooperative extension my entire life as a participant and now as a professional. So this has been a wonderful opportunity to learn about the genesis of this idea, the people who started it, and to notice the patterns and values and the fractal of how that has continued in our work today in 4-H. So I'm very excited to explore these ideas more. And especially, I really appreciate Bailey's focus on spirit and the mindset, right? That's still very central to how we do 4-H. Science is not that dusty pile of facts. It's how we think about the world and understand it, and the questions we ask and the evidence we explore to answer those questions, and we change our mind, right? So I really love providing those opportunities for youth, and it's wonderful to explore that. This has been going on for generations in New York, and to be part of that legacy.
So thank you to both of you. I want to, Krista, one thing has struck me. I've had a chance to spend some time with you, which I'm very happy
He's
to
on my
have done.
committee. Chair.
And one of the things I really feel and see in your work is this conviction about the mental and physical health restoration possibilities of people on the land, being connected to the land and being in places like the Learning Farm. I wonder if you could say a few things about that and connection, because I think that's the through line of the spirit. But what's behind that is, John talked about the eminent scientific men who were saying that this was a bunch of, what was the word?
Gushing
Sentimentality. But what I know what's behind your work is very deep, powerful commitments to sovereignty, to freedom, to livelihoods of dignity, all of those kinds of things. So maybe if you could share some things about your work.
Thanks, Scott. and I'm an unabashed sentimentalist. Like, I feel that, like, we need to re-engage. I think part of what brings us to this work is wanting to re-engage the heart. I think so much of our work is just looking at the pieces of things and being productive and useful and, doing what needs to be done. And I feel like what we're trying to come back to, we're not inventing this, but coming back to beautiful village-like, ways that all of us originate from, where we can stop being machines, where we can stop making children be machines at school, and where we can just be humans and not be defined by what we do or with a value that we bring, perceived value. So I think when we can let go and we have space and be empowered to let go of how our society kind of wants to, systemically push us into corners and boxes, when we can let go of those things and have a geographic space to let go of those things, it's amazing what happens to the mind. It's amazing how the body begins to thrive. I have a good friend, Davi Mosey, who has a forest bathing practice at our farm, and she just goes and sits and she plays in the dirt and she picks up leaves and looks. And if you're struggling with insomnia and different things, it's amazing what can happen if you're even when you're not directly trying to address what's happening with your body, like the benefits of being in nature and the benefits of allowing yourself to have space and time in nature are just deeply profound.
Yeah, and I think that idea of wholeness, right? In 4-H, we pledge our head, heart, hands, and health all to learning. It's a whole person experience. And I think that's part of the promise of learning that Liberty Hyde Bailey hoped that public schools would get to, but we're still hoping that that's going to happen. So I think it's very powerful. We can create these sort of countercultural spaces on your farm and in our 4-H programs where thriving, that's what we're striving for. We're trying to create environments that help young people thrive and connected to that because we all live in a context, right? In order for me to help a young person thrive, I also have to experience thriving and know what that means for me. So we focus on supporting young people, but what we're really talking about is how do communities grow and thrive together? And that requires thinking, feeling, and being, not just doing. So I think that that dynamic that we balance between doing and being is a really important question and paradox that we try to hold.
John, I'm wondering if you might have a question that you could ask to Alexa or Krista. You did spend such an effort bringing this book back into life, and I highly recommend reading the introduction that John wrote that is very impressive, a bit of work. But here we are in the 21st century. I know what it's like to do history since I'm a historian, and I'm living in the mid-19th century right now myself. So you were living in 1903 world, but here we are in the 21st century, and wondering what questions do you have for the practitioners, the leaders, the new theorists and philosophers that are on the ground?
Yeah, well, I can ask a question. I want to ask a question about that. It's so interesting to hear you talk about the swamps outside of East Lansing, specifically because when Bailey was a student at Michigan Ag, one of his jobs that he picked up at the college was collecting specimens for the biology classes and botany classes. And he spent a lot of time in those swamps. So there's a very good chance that the two of you were, 100 and yeah, it was Bailey's swamp and it was Krista's swamp and it was, but I guess one question that I have, I mean, we're talking both about the development of children, right? which is so helpful to keep recentering me, because that's why I had that slide with my daughter at the beginning, because I keep wanting to push in these other directions, but that really is the core of this. But it seems like that connects to also this question of conservation. I mean, why is the swamp no longer there? And why is it a strip mall now that's since become mostly abandoned? Is it because we didn't love, not enough of us loved that swamp enough? Or so how do you both think about the relationship between this educational work and the larger ecological work that needs to happen? I feel like we should talk about climate change more and more specifically, and I have some thoughts about that too, but I want to hear you first. And to what extent is this kind of book a potential tool for making some of those links or continuing the kind of work that you're doing? That was like 3 questions.
Well, I love questions, so usually I love asking them, but that's okay. Yeah, so I think young people are asking those questions too, right? So I think that's really important to remember. And we have, it's key, a part of our 4-H work, that we partner with young people and plan together and create opportunities together. And part of National 4-H Council's work has been research and listening to young people. And they're worried about what's going on in the world around us. But what gives me hope is they're not just worried, they want to do something about it, right? Because it's easy to fall into an existential crisis and anxiety, and there are people in those places. But our young people want to make change and to protect the world around us. And some of that happens because they were going around the swamps. And some of that happens because an adult noticed, like Julia did, that this is a spark and an interest for a young person, and fanned that flame and said, this is a thing that you could be good at. You paid attention and noticed this, and you can do that. And we can all do that for the young people around us. We can all be spark champions. So I think that's really powerful to remember that, yes, the problems are big, but they only get solved if we all work together to contribute to solutions.
That's brilliant. I'll just tag on a little bit. I feel like, yeah, that teacher, it's about relationship, and we can really have a connection with the children in our lives where we can spur them on in the ways that we can kind of see where they might want to go. That's so beautiful. There was a Reclaim Earth Day rally yesterday at Bernie Milton Plaza downtown. And it was put on by a group of high school students at IHS here. And they just did the most beautiful job. They organized all the speakers. All the speakers were extremely moving. And I was deeply honored to close everything out with some, little bit of something. But I was so moved by what their passions led them to do. And for me, it's like when I'm invited, even though I'm not a climate change scholar, I'm not an expert in climate change, although I am passionate about doing my part to help, be the solution. But they were so engaged, and I think my job is to support them. I think our job is to support them. That was their own initiative. Nobody made them do it. And when we can get behind them and push them forward and give them the resources they need to do the things that they want to do, they can help protect the swamp. They can help. And I'll share really quickly. There was a woman named Faye Whiteshine who led this youth program in Michigan in the Department of Natural Resources, and she created a program for teens at my high school who were interested in the environment, and that was my summer job. And I every summer from freshman year to senior year, I would walk the landfill sites and Superfund sites in Michigan, and people would be like, "You did what?" And I loved every minute of it, and it felt like somebody believe in me, that I could get a job doing something that would protect Michigan aquifers and waterways and the watershed and protect our air, and making sure that things weren't leaking, either way, as a teenager, that I could have that responsibility. And so not selling our young people short, and not assuming that you're the generation that's going to be on your phone and you don't really care and you're disengaged. No, these people are engaged and they want to be supported.
Can I just add on to that? One thing you said is you're not a scholar, right? And I don't know if that's true. Okay, thank you. Also, that's one of the other key parts of Liberty Hyde Bailey's experiment that really resonates with me, because in 4-H we work with people who bring lots of different kinds of wisdom. And even though our work is science-based, it's also community-based and lots of different ways of knowing. So part of what we get to do together is bring together all of those kinds of wisdom, kind of like he did in writing the book, curating a story of what's happening in the real world, and that sort of lesson that we can learn to replicate that in other communities and keep learning from each other. So if it feels daunting, like no one has enough information to do a thing, we can take small steps and make pivots to make a difference and learn the thing that we need to know to do.
Oh, there, yeah. One of the things that I think based on what both of you are saying, I'm currently working at the Climate Museum in New York City, where I've been for 2 years on this postdoc fellowship. And one of the things that's been so clarifying for me about working there is that the basic theory of change, this is a museum that is dedicated to doing its part to help solve the climate crisis, which is the first of its kind in the United States. That doesn't exist elsewhere. And I think a lot of people hear it at first and they're like, why would you use a museum to do that? And in addition to the fact that museums are trusted cultural institutions still in our society, and so people do trust them and they're public facing, there's also a growing awareness of the fact that, there's, according to studies from George Mason University and Yale, literally a supermajority of Americans, not only overall, but in every single state, so 2/3 or more, whether you're looking at New York State or Alabama or Alaska or Michigan or whatever, know that human-caused climate change is happening and are concerned about it. Mm-hmm. And many of them support really pretty bold policies that would be classified as climate justice policies. But another study has shown that we perceive that to be the exact opposite. So if you poll people on how many Americans do you think care about climate change or are concerned, we think it's 1/3. It's actually 2/3. So we're in a majority, but we think we're in a minority, which locks us in this silence. And you're talking about climate anxiety, right? Which is such a huge problem for all of us, but especially for young people who have that much more life ahead of them. And it's that much more tragic. And so what we need is the political will, right? The ability to get this democratic machine, experiment, whatever, to lock in around the kinds of solutions that we need, which are both going to be large scale and also very localized. And how do you do that? You do that through the arts and culture and community. And so the science is like a really critical element in that mix, but it so far hasn't been the thing to get people to demand the changes that we need. So, and for Bailey, I think he was seeing that same kind of dynamic at the level of education, and I think this is partly why including poetry in these nature study lessons was so important, and educating the whole child. So anyway, what we need is that kind of like sense of community and movement that you're articulating, I think. So that's just another point of, yeah.
John, I want to connect with what you're saying to ask another question of our two panelists. When I was trying to tamp the fire in my head back in the fall of 2000, and I was writing by hand of these passages from Bailey's books, there was one line that grabbed me more than anything, and that I put in my email signature. And the line is, spirit counts for more than knowledge. That's a line in this book. And I loved that in part because the fire in my head was partly me being intimidated by the fact that I am a tenure track professor at Cornell University, and how much do I really know compared to these superstar faculty folk? And I loved the spirit counts for more than knowledge, because I had a lot of spirit. And, you know, we look at words like spirit and sympathy, and we see how those words are used to denigrate or trivialize or diminish the power. But I grabbed hold of that because I knew that it contained some wisdom. Spirit count, it doesn't mean, what he did not say, that knowledge doesn't count. He said that spirit counts for more than knowledge. And it strikes me today in the world where we have so much knowledge, piles of it and technologies, that it still means something important for us. So I want to ask both of you, when you read a sentence like spirit counts for more than knowledge, how does that play out in your life and work? Or does it resonate or connect with your life and work?
Oh, 100%. And this is the area that sometimes I feel nobody wants to hear about Krista's philosophy. But I feel like that is, that excites me as well, because it's been so lost. And I think maybe there was never a time where the general populace embraced the idea of creative design or the idea that you can engage the divine in nature. You can be reminded of something greater than yourself in nature. I think the human face is one of those things that even in cities, even in urban areas where you don't have much nature, just the human touch and human connection can be that for you. And I think there's something in the creation that calls to us. And for me, I am trying to be more mindful. And I think that's one of the words that, Bailey alludes to is mindfulness. But I try to be more mindful of making space for God, making space for my connection with something greater than me, something that loves, something that embraces and welcomes, something that has sympathy, something that wants to be connected to me, that is intangible and unseen. And I think sometimes when you look at the planet in pictures, you see this little lonely, green, blue planet, and you think, wow, this is, I feel sad for us. We are isolated. But I think, and in this world, we can feel, even though we're surrounded by people, sometimes we can feel alone. But nature study, nature immersion can be, for me, a reminder that I'm not alone. And so combining that with building knowledge, but building knowledge not just for knowledge's sake, but building knowledge in ways that enhance my relationships and enhance my understanding of how to be in the world, and how to conduct myself in ways that are actually useful to others. That word useful is so interesting. He touches on it in the book, just being everything has to be of use. But that still is meaningful to me because I want to help and I want to love people in the ways that they want to be. So anyway, I'm rambling, but that's my take on that.
It's rambling I like. I just want to say, in our 4-H space, I would name some of the things you talked about, that sort of transcendental awareness. We talk about indicators of thriving. How can we tell that young people are on a pathway towards developing this thriving approach to life and experiencing it? And what you described there is what we're hoping every young person gets a chance to experience in their life. And I think talks about, one of the things that really resonates with me in this work is how it's a way of doing the work, right? And building the connection and creating opportunities to contribute. All of these things are part of a meaningful, healthy, vibrant sort of life. So I want to say yes to everything you said. And I think the other thing that really resonates with me about spirit and knowledge and balancing that is just how accessible it is. It gives us so many pathways into thinking about how we can connect to nature and contribute through nature. And I know in my STEM work often we talk about STEAM because we like to collect acronyms, but especially because art is a doorway in. If people do not see themselves as science people, maybe they see themselves as artists. And in the end, it's a false dichotomy, right? We are whole, complex, nuanced people, and all these kinds of knowledge are important and powerful and integrated to each other. So I think that is really important to be able to name and talk about in that inspiring way. And then the last thing I'll say is I also love how it makes it approachable for a teacher too, because I've also felt that, oh no, I don't know if I have enough expertise to teach this. And I often support people who do that. Like, I can't do robotics. You want me to do what? Right? But what we really want you to do is set the stage for youth to ask questions, to really lean into their curiosity, to hold on to that passion. And you don't have to know the answer. Someone else might know. And you want to know what? Science might not know yet. Isn't that the power of it? We could be going into the unknown together, into discovering something new about who we are as humans and how we can show up in the world, right? Maybe having the right answer is overrated.
I'm feeling, yes. Yeah, okay, so why don't we see if there are a few questions we could take before we break. I'm wanting to note that we have refreshments that will be out there for reception, and also books, and we can have more conversation when we're out there. And before we go to the questions, I neglected to mention and express my gratitude to Eveline and to the Mann Library for all the work that they did to make this event possible. It was, you really do a top-notch job. It's always such a wonderful thing to be at a book talk event here with the Mann Library. So thank you for what you do. So we have a question from the online?
Carmen wanted to know, are current land-grant college curricula moving in a direction? I do need this. Apparently I need this. Are the current land-grant college curricula moving in a direction that will fulfill the needs of the youth wanting to become engaged at a higher level? That's question one. So chew on that. Oh, you want this? You want the easy one first. The first question, well, and there's another one that came in. This is exciting. Bailey was the first president of the American Nature Study Society. What happened to that society, and who was the last president? Jeopardy question.
I feel bad for not knowing the name of the last president of the society, but yes, it claimed the title into the 21st century of America's oldest conservation organization, I think. So it really did last for a long time. Bailey actually served 2 terms as president. And they published the Nature Study Review. Anyway, I don't know. I think, so I corresponded with some of the leaders from the later portion of the history of this organization during the making of this book. And some of them actually supported the publication and making it open access, which, by the way, this is open access. You can read it for free online if you don't want to buy the copy. And so, yeah, they were around for a very long time doing their work. And I think they petered out like many organizations do. But their papers have been donated to the Brandwine Institute, which is a natural history institute somewhere on the East Coast. Yeah.
So the question about the curriculum, I know that we have here Marvin Pritz, who's one of the faculty members who brought students here to this event today. So, there is, how would you answer that question, Marvin, that you heard?
Yeah.
You want Paul to repeat the question?
No, I remember
You
the
got it.
question, yeah. I think there's a whole range of people. I mean, I think we suffer at the university from science fundamentalism, where we hold science above everything else. But like this class here that we went and visited the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, it's really high tech, but we try to integrate art. We went to museums, we ate food, produced on those farms and so forth. We try to create a whole experience around that. And I think there are faculty who do that. In my other classes, we integrate art and science and food and everything like that to have a holistic experience. But I think that's few and far between because of the dominance of science in our curriculum. It's my opinion.
So that was a no?
It's a yes, he's here and it exists, but,
Scott, do you want to take?
whether it's widespread. So we'll take a couple of questions from here first, though, starting here.
This is going to be a follow-up, but for our youth educators, I would love to get your perspective on curriculum in public comprehensive schools, but also career technical schools, because there's a strong transfer between those who are in career technical education, vocational agriculture, previously known, and its transition to land-grant colleges. It's one of the strongest cooperations and channels for students to study agriculture. So from public schools to extension education too, is there a good pipeline between our agriculture education in high school than to land grants? And is it fulfilling nature-based studies?
That was a lot of great questions. I would
Yeah.
love to learn about what you think about curriculum, what that means, because right, part of the fun of these conversations is always we bring our own understanding of things into the world. I also heard under your question this idea of a pipeline, right? That is not my favorite metaphor to think about how young people grow and thrive in the world. We talk about ecosystems, right? And pathways and relationships. I am not a leaky pipe. I started out in STEM and now I work in a different way because life emerged and grew in a different way than I expected. So yes, and the opportunities are out there, right? Part of what we try to do is listen to what the young person cares about and connect them with people who also care about that, spark champions. And so we do have 4-Hers, for example, who are highly passionate about careers in agriculture and technology and all the related fields, food and, oh, no, I'm not going to tell you the list. It'll take all day. So yes, that is happening in some cases. And yes, we can do better about it. There are youth who have not connected to 4-H yet or have not connected to the opportunity that exists in other ways of learning. So there's definitely opportunity for growth there. I mean, part of it is how do we define education and what counts as valuable education? So I've seen my colleagues all across the state expanding that definition for youth and expanding opportunity. And it's something I'm really grateful to be part of.
Thank you. Can maybe take one more question and then we will go to the reception afterwards. So David.
Yeah, I'll just mention in passing that Arizona State University is currently conducting a survey trying to identify youth-facing curricula around climate. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I have, if I could ask a compound question, if I'm the last one. One looking backwards, one looking forwards. One part, so the backwards looking one, and I'm David Kay, chair of the National Extension Climate Initiative. So the backwards looking question, I just read a fascinating biography of Alexander von Humboldt, which most people in the United States at least have not heard about, but used to be one of the most famous people on the planet. Had parades in his honor in New York and many, many other capitals because of his work, identifying, sort of bring the idea of a holistic concept of nature to the fore, worked with Goethe, there's all kinds of connections to art, to all the things you're talking about. So I'm just kind of wondering, and maybe a narrow sense with our Bailey, how familiar Bailey might have been actually with von Humboldt's work. That's the backward-looking question. The forward-looking question is, just yesterday there was an announcement out of the White House about the long-discussed Climate Corps being formed, and I'm kind of wondering if you have if any of you have sort of thoughts about how our 4-H youth programming might sort of connect to the idea of Climate Corps, even though it's kind of limited. It's maybe less there than meets the eye, but there's something there that meets the eye. Thank you.
Humboldt, yes. I think, I think he was an admirer of Humboldt, as many naturalists were at that time. But you can see the influences strongly, I think. Absolutely.
Maybe I'll follow the same. Yes, I think there's plenty of opportunities for youth who are already taking action in their communities to make positive change to protect the environment, and also for those who might be interested but haven't had the opportunity yet. So I'd love to learn more about how we can connect some of those projects together.
Thank you.
Really quick, Ithaca City School District has an equitable and edible farm school program that we've helped build school gardens, and we've worked with Ithaca Children's Garden and Cornell Botanical Gardens on the George Washington Carver Gardens project. So building more gardens, getting kids in gardens, and growing their own food has been happening locally by a number of different players, and I hope that will grow.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Alexa. Thanks to all of you for coming. Please enjoy the reception.